Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Nave, always airing first on WPVMLP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Thank you, Devine Dial, for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville, and Robin Collier for managing KCEI-FM in Taos, New Mexico. I really appreciate that. If you'd like to reach out to me, Nave at jamesnave.com. Nave is spelled Nave. I would love to hear from you, and I'd like to remind you we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to improve your writing chops, imaginativestorm.com is a good place to start. So today I have a friend of mine whom I've known for many years. We met in the early days of the creativity movement in the early 2000s, Nancy Colasurdo. And Nancy lives in Hoboken, New Jersey. I overlapped with Nancy in New York a great deal, and she did come to some of the creativity camps, and maybe one or more, I'm not sure, at least one, when Julia Cameron and I were producing Artist Way creativity camps in Taos in the early 2000s. So time has ticked on. Nancy still lives in Hoboken. Nancy was a journalist when I met her. Nancy still continues to write from a journalistic point of view, as well as from other points of view. She's taught creativity. She does online classes. She's held some Artist Way classes I know of for sure, and maybe others as well. So I'm curious to speak with Nancy. So Nancy, welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's just begin with what you are doing now. You were a journalist, a writer when I met you 20 years ago. When we stay with something over a period of time, which you have, things evolve. Your skill improves, your sensibilities heighten, your interests change. I know you at one time were writing about RVs for an RV magazine and other things as well. You've done a lot of media appearances on different channels in the New York area. So where are you now with your work as a creative and as a human being moving forward in 2024, a disruptive time, and yet here we are having this interview? What's up, Nancy?
Well, just hearing you with that introduction just brought me back to when I met you. It was 2001 at the Creativity Camp in Taos. And when I say 2001, that should signal something in a lot of people's brains. Oh, August 2001, a month before 9/11, actually weeks before 9/11. And then I came back to New York, and I was a TV producer at the time for a media company. And suddenly, within 6 months, laid off, started training to be a coach, took all I had learned from the Artist Way camp and started implementing it and trying to also survive and swim in very rough waters at that time because, advertising was tough in media and media landscape was changing already. So yes, here I am. I call myself an activist journalist now. I write columns. I'm a freelancer. So I write and then I pitch them. I write what comes to me and then I pitch them to publications. I get assigned some sometimes, but for the most part, it's what's coming out of my brain, what's inspiring me, what's sparking something within me. I'm also a coach. I continue to coach. I've had a coaching practice since 2002, also a product of that layoff I was just talking about. I got really serious about it because of that, which I think turned out to be a good thing. I do some editing, very picky about that, some editing projects, but for the most part, that's what I'm doing these days.
Well, I remember that creativity camp very well. That was the one Julia was not able to attend. So we had a large group of people teaching or facilitating creativity. I've come to think you can't teach creativity. It's something that we have, and it's just a matter of how you organize what you have. You said you got a lot out of the creativity camp in 2001. I would love to hear more about what you mean by that, and then we can take that into your activism that you're doing now. But what did you take away from that camp? That was so long ago, 2001, 2024. Was that 23 years ago? I think it was.
Yes.
My goodness.
Yes. I could tell you a really direct thing, which I think illustrates the value of how I emerged from that camp. So, yes, Julia was not there. Put a pin in that because I'm going to get back to that because there was interesting things happening later because of that. So I meet you and you do an exercise among many exercises, but one of the exercises you do at this creativity camp where I'm with a friend, but I've now met all these new people, which was really exhilarating. I'm an introvert, so I have a hard time with that unless I'm in that fixed setting. But you had done an exercise where you were standing in front of the room in front of like a whiteboard or a pad, asked everyone to give you a word. And so there were all these words, and then you give us 20 minutes maybe to write a poem from those words. Now, this is way outside of my comfort zone. Yes, I'm comfortable with words, but I'm not comfortable writing poetry. I had written poetry as a kid, I mean, teenage kid, thinking it was good. It was basically greeting card poetry, and I'm not disparaging myself, just saying I now know the difference. So, forcing us to do that, it was hard for me, but did it. And then I think I wound up reading aloud mine. I was one of the people in the room that did. And it was just fun. And I realized like the world is not going to end if I put together a poem with these words that's not Emily Dickinson. So you freed up my imagination and unleashed something where I just felt freer. I'd been a writer a long time, but it was always in journalistic confines. I had never written, that I can even recall, fiction, except when I was 12 and I tried to write a sort of a Nancy Drew knockoff. Honestly, it was that freedom, and also the exercise where you asked us to make a doll, which I was so uncomfortable with that I seriously contemplated going into town and shopping that day and skipping the whole thing. But you had said to us early in the week, gather some supplies for doll making. What is this guy talking about doll making? I wrote about this in my memoir because I just thought, I'm not doing this. This was my immediate thought. And I wound up creating a mermaid that I still have, and I sometimes use as a tree topper on my Christmas tree. And the mermaid was very organic for me. It was just this thing that came about. So now I leave this camp to come back to a TV producing job. However, in between, I come back from Taos. I had to go to a wedding in Nantucket. At the wedding, I decided, aside from the normal gift that I was giving the bride and groom, I wrote that one poem. I sat in a cafe in Nantucket and I used your exercise. I picked out what words would I like to put in Aaron and Roger's poem. Boom, boom, boom. I put a bunch of words down on paper first. And that's how I constructed the poem. I just made that. And then, it's part of their wedding album now. Is it Emily Dickinson? No, but I don't care because they loved it. It made me feel good to express. And so now if you take that and then bring it back to New York, a TV producer for Oxygen Media, that's a very new role for me as opposed to web producer / writer editor. They had given me an opportunity. And so here we are, 9/11 happens. I'm wearing the jacket I just bought in Nantucket, and I'm just fresh off these trips. I've got the jewelry on that I bought in Taos, and I'm feeling so renewed. And it's a gorgeous day, and I go in, and 9/11 happens. And so everything changed. That's when I think the openness that I got from that. Also, I did come back, and I put out to my fellow employees at Oxygen. I asked corporate if they would let me use the conference room after hours, 6 o'clock, to teach the artist's way. And they said yes. And I did it for free because I wanted a pilot kind of program to see how I did. And so I had a group of, I want to say 5 or 6 of my coworkers who then became my Artist's Way students. So the openness from that camp, and having done the Artist's Way prior to the camp, obviously I knew who Julia was or I wouldn't be there, right? It all led to where I am now.
And I recall you came to the 12-week course Julia and I taught in New York City at the Lighthouse in 2003. We taught a Sunday afternoon course that ran for 12 weeks. We had 60 some people in that course, and you were one of those as well. Had you taught the Artist's Way before you took that course in 2003?
Yes. What happened was 2001, we have the creativity camp. By 2002, March, I've now been laid off. So now I'm scrambling to create things, to be self-employed. as I simultaneously try to find full-time work. And one of the things I did was go to a local bookstore here. They had a lot of community projects, and I asked them if I could teach the Artist's Way there. So that's when I started teaching it for pay. And I taught it after their store closed in the evening, which was 7 or 7:30 or something. I had an Artist's Way class there. I had several of them, as it turned out, one after another. I would say 2003, you're saying that was, because I do remember it. I just wouldn't have remembered the year. Yes, I had already started to teach the Artist's Way. Was very heartened because Julia, I've seen her speak a bunch of times, so I don't remember which time. It might have been this time that you're speaking of, but I love that she would say, how many people in the room are teaching the Artist's Way? And there were 75 or so people in that room, if I recall, and a bunch of hands went up. And so I was like, yeah, she really does welcome this. You're not stealing her stuff. She knows that in order to teach the Artist's Way, people have to buy the books in the class, right? This is how it continues to thrive.
And to Julia's sensibility credit, she was never, ever thinking about selling more books when she asked how many people are teaching the Artist's Way. Her idea was to let the ripples flood across the lake as much as possible. And the only way to do that is have people engage with the work over a long period of time. Even to this day, the Artist's Way's bestseller list in LA, she's at 6 million copies of The Artist's Way over the years, all because of people like you, like me. And one of the things that I've always felt good about in terms of the Artist's Way camps that Julia and I did, we did at least a dozen of them or more. I don't even know now. And then all the Artist's Way classes that I taught, many, many people from those camps and from the classes that I taught moved into their own circle of people to teach like you did. To this day, that's amazing at how we have spread that word out. And who knows how many people you've engaged with who went on somewhere to teach it or to engage with it or to spread that word. So Artist's Way is a remarkable contribution to the culture of creativity, not only in America, all over Europe and all over the world, really, because it's been translated in many languages. So we're lucky to have had those early days experiences engaging with people. So now you're here, 2024, you've been able to transfer all of this material, all of this thinking into how you're functioning now. So what's going on with you as you look through your lens in 2024?
In continuing the Artist's Way thread with regard to that question, it's the openness and the attentiveness to things that continue. And I think about the clients that I currently have in my coaching practice, which I'm looking to expand right now. So I'm in an awareness phase of what my clients have in common, what kind of people I draw. And it's the creatives. It's the, and sometimes it's very subconscious. I'm sure you've come across people like this in all the things you've done because you've done all these writing retreats. You are going to get the 9-to-5er who wants to write. You're not necessarily going to get the full-time writer. That goes for not just writing, but other creative disciplines. You know, I get people who are 9-to-5 executives wondering about their life satisfaction. And then I start working with them. And if you build out that non-work life, what happened to the piano? Are you knitting? They don't even get sometimes what is creative. Professional organizers are extremely creative. If you can figure out how to rework that closet in such a way that it functions better and looks nice, that's a creative venture, as is fixing a lamp. These are creative things that people don't realize are creative. And they're outlets and distractions that sometimes we need, especially in this world we're living in right now. And then trying to live that myself. I don't feel like being contemplative is a luxury. I need downtime so I can process what's happening so that I can put it in my own art, my own creative ventures. I'm asking myself now all kinds of things because May 18th will be a year that I had a knee replacement and I had another one in October. So I've had 2 knee replacements and 2 cataract surgeries in a year, which on some level makes me feel like, gosh, are you ancient? No, I'm 62 and I'm vibrant. And I have a lot to do and say. So what am I going to take away from that? For me, it's not just, oh, I've had this medical procedure, let's move on. I just got vision back. Does that say anything to anybody? It says a lot to me, right? because I had delayed the cataract surgery to finish the knee stuff, my eyesight was really devolving, and I didn't realize it until I had the surgery. I'm sitting here right now. I'm looking across the street at a Catholic church I live across the street from, and I can see every etching in those stained glass windows. That was not the case a month and a half ago. So imagine walking down the street, being able to meet people's eyes. Everything is hitting me now, the changes that I've just been through. And keep in mind, this is all piggybacked on this whole time where we just went through this COVID thing. And I was in my four walls a lot. I keep saying to people, thank God I love my home, because I've been in it a lot. I've made it something that excites me. I like coming in here, and I like the art I have and so forth. The Artist's Way piece too, it pops up constantly when I don't even think of it as Artist's Way anymore. It's just almost like incorporated into my life. The simplest thing, like I'm not going to drink out of a mediocre mug. I want to enjoy my hands on that mug. I want to enjoy my coffee. Remember that exercise Julia has about getting the proper teacup in an antique store. Like it could be one. It doesn't have to be, we don't need the set. If you want the set, great. Have a tea at your house. But if you just want to enjoy that cup of tea with your morning pages or whatever it is, have something that you like.
A lot of the permission people get from the Artist's Way is about ritual and the ease of doing simple things. I was on an interview yesterday with a woman. It was her first. She's a professional journalist. She's young, probably not 30, and well-intentioned, and was very good at what she did with her first podcast interview, something about, she's calling it True North or the North Star podcast. And she asked me to talk about what are some of the most creative things that you do in your life? How do you engage your creativity? And my first answer was, I iron. I love to put the ironing board up, plug the iron in, get some spray starch, and press my shirts. And when I'm doing that, it's a ritual. And I feel completely engaged in the creative act of being alive and making something. And I ironed when I was a little boy. And now I'm in my 70s and I'm still ironing. It's still as creative and satisfying as it was when I first learned how to do it. So here we are, to simplicity, to ritual, to the ease of just being alive in the ordinary world, in your home, the ordinary place. You've been there forever. It's your home. It's not ordinary, and yet it is. Ordinary in the sense that it's commonplace and it's familiar and it's comfortable. So in the Artist's Way work, I loved what you said about not even remembering it's there anymore. I just want to hold a nice cup because I learned that somewhere along the way, and likely it was when I was teaching the Artist's Way.
That's probably one example that's really concrete, but I think it comes in an awful lot of the time, just in terms of the exercises that have you reaching into your childhood, for example. You know, some of that is truly who you are or were. What was your bedroom like as a kid? Did you like it? Did you have a part in creating it? So therefore, if you did, what can you take away from that gave you joy then, could still give you joy now? Red and pink combination, bedspread, I loved it. And ever since then, I think, oh yeah, I like that combination. And you'll find it all over the house here.
And I always say in these conversations, and I have a lot of conversations with people about this, not so many people who have had experience teaching the Artist's Way like you and I have. I tell people all the time, one of the problems with creativity is there's too much of it. Of course, that's not something you're supposed to say because it's thought of as a rare thing. People will say, I'm not that creative. It's not about whether you are more or less creative. You were born with so much creativity. We all were. It confuses us. We're not sure what to do with it because coupling the idea of creativity as so abundant that it confuses you with the idea that we were born to make things and we were born to lean in the direction of beauty, while at the same time we are so disruptive that sometimes we burn the building down after we've built it and it's not so beautiful anymore. We were born, I believe, to go toward beauty by way of making things, by way of creativity, and yet sometimes we destroy things for reasons that we could go into, like ego or doubt or dissatisfaction. When you frame the idea of creativity around an abundance that we all share, and it's more a matter of making by way of organizing, because when you make and you organize, like I iron the shirt, and organize the wrinkles that feels so full because it's connected to the ultimate organization of all things universal.
The organization piece is really interesting. Well, first of all, the ironing, I was trying to not like laugh out loud as you were saying that, because of course I hate ironing and I don't iron ever. However, some of the people nearest and dearest to me have that exact same affinity that you do for it. Like, I have a friend who, she lives in Monterey. When we get on the phone, she's like, I'm going to do my ironing. So she irons actually while she talks on the phone, and that relaxes her. I also manage an acting and dance studio in Manhattan right now. Part of it I like is it actually uses a part of my brain I don't need to use for writing and editing and coaching. Go there. There's creatives using this space. It's dance, it's yoga, it's acting, all these things. I want them to have ease in using it. My vibe there is, okay, go in and make sure everything is copacetic, right? You just want to make sure this place is running smoothly. So yeah, it might be the lost and found drawer. It might be make sure there's water. It could be, you know what, that curtain isn't working there. It's getting in the way of people that are coming here and try to do a dance class. How can we fix that? The slightest problem solving kind of stuff. And I love that. I find that creative, even though you said to me, what is your main source of creativity? It surely would not be that, but it's definitely creative. My boss will say to me, I can tell when you've been to the space, your touch is on it. I'm not even sure what that means, but it probably just means that it's organized. And when you walk in, there's a good energy about it, right? So that's a good feeling to take to whatever you're doing. Like with my clients, I try to instill that piece, because so often, like you were just saying, people say, oh, I'm not creative. People disparage or underestimate their own creativity a lot. It's not like the world is going to change because I convinced you that this task is creative, but it does shift something for them sometimes. There's a little light that goes on. Oh, that is creative. And, I point out to a client that you just told me about this whole corner you decorated for the holidays with these special ornaments and this special things you got to make this quilt. There's creativity all over the place here. And it's just, they see it as tasks or things they do or just things they've always done. Bump it up to the creativity level. And I don't know, there's a feeling that comes with that, I think.
And when you frame it around doing all of these things, frame it around life itself and the activities that we participate in, even buying the ticket to go to the theater or getting in the car, which people in the city in New York don't do as much, and driving down the road, we are always constantly participating in the improvisational moment. It's never existed before till now, and whatever's happening now has never happened before, and we have never seen it. It's brand new. And so we have to do an improvisational dance every millisecond that we live. So if you think about creativity as the driver that allows us to stay afloat, stay erect, stay alive, keep ourselves moving forward, it would be difficult to argue that you are not creative. It would be actually very difficult to argue that there's no such thing as a non-creative moment in anybody's life. The entire thing is creativity. And when we say, oh, he's more creative or she's more creative, they are more creative than I am, we're using almost industrial human measure that we've created in our language that pales in comparison to the vast creative urge that we experience all the time. So it's a very different way of looking at it. And it takes away that responsibility of competition. I'm more creative than you are. Mm-hmm. I don't have a creative bone in my body. I've always thought that was funny because the bones are what create all the blood cells. Every bone in my body is creative because that's why I'm alive. It's constantly creating, even if we are asleep. Yeah, here you are. So even that phrase, I don't have a creative bone in my body, is completely false. So what about your current work, the thinking that you're doing now about the culture, the world? are active in Manhattan. It's a big city. I've lived there a long time, off and on over the years. I know how vital that place is. I know how engaging people are. I know what a great scene it is just to walk out of Penn Station and step on the street, and you are cast in the play, and you are a character like everybody else, and you're invisible, and yet at the same time, you are so uniquely grounded in something that has potency. So, how are you navigating all of that world that you're still working in with full speed?
Moved here in my late 30s. I was a suburban girl for my first 36 years, most of those. Kept describing it when I first moved here. It felt like my life was watching a movie for the longest time, and then I feel like I was in the movie. So right now I'm sort of in this re-entry phase and re-engaging on all fronts. I have not been in Manhattan since September because of health constraints. So it's a great example, though, of what we've been talking about. When I was there in September, it was prior to surgery number 2, and I forced myself in sort of an artist date. For those not familiar, taking yourself in to see art. I actually wound up going with a friend, so technically not an artist date, but there is a painting by Manet called Olympia. She's quite famous. She lives in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, and I have seen her there. However, she was visiting us in New York, and I was going to be laid out after surgery and freaking out. I had a week before to see her. And I took myself in. I got to see Olympia while she was in New York and write about that. So it kind of touches on a couple of things you were saying. When I'm not in my own creative place, I am constantly seeking out other people's creativity, right? So going to museums, going to galleries, concerts. I love even street art sometimes. Like I just really enjoy going in, and I have certain friends who enjoy certain kinds of art experiences. So that's who I seek out. Sometimes I go by myself. But I'm actually right now kind of embarking on this re-entry idea and getting into, okay, today I'm going to go re-see, re-engage, or see something that people have been talking about that I haven't been able to see yet. You know, whether it's a gallery exhibit or something along those lines. Even in Jersey City right now, there's a new sculpture display along the waterfront there. Thought this is a good walking exercise for me right now. So that's on my agenda. So right now, my imagination is filling my schedule for me. And I'm in that place right now where I think physically I can do a lot now. I've been in physical therapy a while, so I can do a pretty good amount, but I'm not at levels where I was. So I have to kind of go, okay, take a deep breath. You can't do all of this. Pick what you want to do. It's a really exhilarating time because I'm a little bit overwhelmed with choices. There's a lot going on, even in just Hoboken, that I want to get to, where I sometimes go, okay, I don't think you can handle 3 things in one day. So which one are you going to do? In terms of my writing, I'm paying a lot of attention to what's happening in the world. I've written everything from the local election, city council election, my view on something like that, because maybe it's impacting rent control, which impacts my life, all the way to what is going on nationally and internationally and how it's making me feel, what things I see, trends, cultural shifts, things that I find scary in terms of, let's say, our news silos. Being mindful of my own, I think that's important. Trying to invite other viewpoints in. At the same time, I think a lot of what I'm writing about lately, I just feel like we've transcended the idea where we differ in politics. I think what we differ in is morals in a lot of discussions. When someone says, oh, you'd give up that relationship or that longtime friendship because of politics, no. Maybe for morals, because we're just not seeing eye to eye. Am I going to say that I'm not going to be friends with someone because they're a Christian? Of course not. I don't consider myself one anymore. However, I have lots of Christian friends and relatives that I love dearly. However, if you've decided that your God has encouraged you to discriminate against people that I love, now I've got to rethink that. That to me, now we're in morals. We're not in politics. I just had somebody say to me yesterday, oh, you have to be in agreement. No, I don't. I don't have to be in agreement, but I do have to parse the kind of relationship it's going to be. I had someone very close to me yesterday tell me she thought she was being helpful, but she said, you're going to be careful. You're going to lose business if you're only going to work with people who agree with you. And I said, you missed the whole point of my story, which was I was trying to explain to her, if I express my viewpoints very openly, which I do on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and someone looks at them and says, she would not be the right coach for me because of some belief system that I have, then they're correct. Their instinct is correct, and I'm okay with that. Talk about taking the opposite tack. This person who I love dearly is trying to be constructive and saying to me, you're saying you won't work with that person because they don't agree with you. I said, you just took the exact opposite. I'm telling you, if they look at something I wrote and say they don't want to work with me, I'm okay with that. I was not dismissing that person. I have, frankly, coached people of all political persuasions at this point. I wrote for foxbusiness.com for 5 years, 2 columns a week, and I got all kinds of mail, and I made inroads with some people, and others, I just let them be nasty. But there were some very thoughtful emails that I got as feedback on my columns there. And I enjoy that so much because I pick and choose who I think maybe might be open to listening. I don't engage haters or trolls. That's just a waste of time. But I personally like to take that one person who I think I can have a conversation with and maybe get them to see a glimpse of something, and vice versa, because they might show me something I hadn't seen. And I don't even remember the topic, but I remember writing a column for Fox Business. He called himself an old timer. He was an old timer in Arizona that wrote me this email and disagreed with me. And he was pretty polite, but he had a hammer out. I wrote him back and I said, I think that you're right about this, but I'm not too sure about this part. And he was so flabbergasted that a human being wrote him back, based on the internet. And he said, Nancy, what do you care about what an old guy like me thinks anyway? And it just floored me because I thought, you know what? He just was one of those keyboard warriors, as they call him, right? He just wanted to dash off his opinion. But we wound up actually having a dialogue, and I enjoyed that. And I've had a few people that have decided to follow me on social because they disagree. Certainly, I'm not going to put myself in the same breath as someone like Howard Stern in terms of audience, right? But Howard Stern, if you ever followed anything about his career from the very beginning, in his movie, they touch on the fact that, he's got all these followers because people like him. But then when they ask people, why do you keep listening if you don't like him? It's because I want to hear what he's going to say next. So, we have that inclination to be drawn to people that are kind of ticking us off also because it's thought-provoking. I think there's something energizing about it.
Well, we're talking about creativity again here. The ability to listen, to state where you're coming from, or my ability to state where I'm coming from, and while at the same time allowing the person you're engaging with to feel like you at least respect their choices about where they're coming from, even if you disagree with it, requires a fair amount of thoughtfulness, skill, creativity, because it can devolve really quickly into just 2 people spitting at each other without any outcome other than just feeling awful between the two. So I love the idea of at least thinking about these exchanges from a creative point of view. I was having a conversation with a fellow and his wife recently, in their 80s, very well-to-do folks, and he and his wife are big Republican Trump supporters. I said, look, I've been a Democrat all my life. I come from North Carolina. It's a tradition in the South to vote Democratic. And I've always counted myself as a bit of a liberal. Sometimes I go back and forth between that. But I will tell you, I'm voting for Biden. I am not going to vote for Trump. I didn't say that in a way to point my finger and say, you are wrong. And then I asked the fellow a question that I'd never asked before. I said, can you tell me what the deep state is? Because that's a big theme in the Republican political arena. I said, and I'm looking at a guy that retired as a physician, Stanford educated. His children went to Harvard. The guy's reading The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich at the moment. That's an 800-page book. This is no slouch, right? he said, what the deep state is to me, and what I think we mean by it, or what I mean by it, it's all of the bureaucratic offices are populated with people that don't do anything. They draw a salary, don't do much work. They're just waiting for their retirement. They're slouchy. They bog the bureaucracy down. And we need to get rid of those people, and we need to replace them with people that will do the work that we need to do to move everything along. And I said, so you're not talking about the deep state as an inanimate object. You're actually describing the people that house the offices of the root system that holds our country up. It's a bit like we're not going to chop down all the root systems underneath the redwoods and hope that they'll survive. He said, we want to replace the people in these bureaucracies. And I'd never understood that till he said it. Now, that may be different with other people. I said, man, so are you saying what you want to do is take the people out and plug new people in who will be more efficient? And he said, absolutely. And I said, well, I can agree with you there. I said, you're not talking about destroying the deep state. You're talking about repopulating the deep state. And then I said, what will happen in 15 years or 10? Will those people fall into the same bureaucratic mindset that the ones you replace them with? And he paused for a moment and said, they probably will. So here I'm sitting with a Republican conservative fellow. I'm on the other side, and yet we could arrive at a place that we both agreed with. Because I agreed with him. If somebody's working a job and they're not doing their work and you're paying taxes, you probably want them to at least answer the phone and say hello and may I help you. But apparently some of the people don't.
Yeah, I like those kinds of discussions too. I mean, that specific one, what intrigues me about that, if I had him in front of me, I would ask, okay, so why is Trump the person to do that? Because the examples we've had have not been that, right? So he takes the post office, wants to kneecap it. This is all framed in election winning and losing, but the perceptions of whether that organization or that institution is doing its job. Well, he clearly kneecapped it and took away a lot of mailboxes around the country. That was happening. There were pictures all over the wire services and so forth. So that's just one example. But the IRS was perceived by a lot of people in that camp as an institution that's just going to come after them for all the rich people for their money. I can assure you, having owed the IRS money on occasion where I have to go into payments, maybe I would say 1 or 2 years of the last 20, it's not a big deal. You basically go, okay, I owe you taxes. I need to do it in a payment plan, and you do it. But they come after you pretty good. There's interest, and we could argue about whether that's right or wrong. But I can tell you they're doing their jobs pretty well. So a lot of times on the state level, you'll hear it's almost a cliche. The state bureaucracy, the red tape, and that's very true, I think, in a lot of cases. So I get that maybe that deep state. It's just interesting. I never heard the deep state described in the way that he described it. And so that does intrigue me. It opens things up in my own head for sure. When I think of the deep state, can't help it. I go to fiction. If you ever saw the show Scandal, there's this whole storyline that concerns the underground that goes on in Washington. To me, like I look at that as the deep state. And so, yes, it is a personal difference, right, in the definition too.
Well, I'd always thought of it as that, but it had never occurred to me to ask somebody straight up, what do you mean by the deep state?
Yeah.
That was his answer. Now, I imagine I could go down the street and ask the next person and they'd have a different answer. It was just an interesting response.
How many other people would respond similarly? I think that would be interesting. It would explain a little bit more to me of the fervor around changing it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think Donald Trump's genius, I'm not a Trump supporter, but I can acknowledge his genius is that he is a true opportunistic politician, more so than almost anybody that's come along in God knows how long. That's why he's made it as far as he's made it. So he's not particularly invested in getting rid of the deep state. He's invested in winning the election, and he'll come right out and say it. So he moves around a bit in terms of what he talks about because he understands storytelling. And he understands the psychology of storytelling and how people are not thinking about 6 months ago. They're thinking about right now, and how the stories they're experiencing that he is telling connects to them in a way that makes them think they thought of it. Now, he's not having that effect on me, but he is having that effect on a lot of people. And it's easy for somebody to make that phenomenon happen in almost anybody's head. So Trump's not able to do that with me. Somebody else might come along and do it.
Yeah. Yes. That is an interesting piece of it. Why isn't Biden drawing all these people? We're not looking for that environment with Biden. Either no, we're voting for him, or we don't. In most cases, a lot of us that are voting for him just know we are. We don't need to go make signs and do all that hoopla. But it's interesting because we're on the outside looking in with regard to Trump. Trust me when I tell you, I'm steeped in Trump supporters in my life, so I understand them. To see evangelicals who basically said, oh, he said the P word, what, a week before the election, that tape came out where you can just walk up to women and grab them because you're important, yada, yada, yada. I don't know. Maybe if two people didn't vote, it didn't matter. He won, right? But keep in mind, right now, he's going on trial for this Stormy Daniels payoff. The crazy thing about that is, had he never paid her off, he would have won anyway because they didn't care. So when you reach a level where you're getting, I think, some of the most moral people in this country to vote for you, in spite of that behavior, there is clearly something that is a draw, transcends. And so my long way of agreeing with your opportunistic statement, he just really understands what he has to do and how he has to shift in order to keep the support. He really does tap into something where they feel like he is them.
And he affects me, he affects you. And what I mean by that is I'm always thinking about him. He's always on my mind. And I'm a Trump antagonist, maybe you might say. And yet I do appreciate the fact that a character like that has become almost an earworm. It's like he's in my head. And it's a remarkable thing because I'm well armored. And yet there he is in my head. Here we are on this radio show talking about Donald Trump. And that's a really brilliant phenomenon, even though I find it a bit sad because I think the outcome, if Trump wins the election and returns to office for another 4 years, will not bode well for America. Although my friends I talk to feel like if Joe Biden's elected, it's the end of time. So we are in a fantastic, fantastic time that can go either way. Two roads diverge in a yellow wood. Which will we take? And how will that play out? I don't know. So, Nancy, we're coming to the very end of our time together. So, in that spirit, I would love for you just to take a few moments to sum up where you are not right now, a few thoughtful comments just to take us out and tell us how to get in touch with you if folks would like to know more about what you're up to.
That sounds great. I'm a human interest columnist first and foremost. I would love to find a permanent home for my column. I'm enjoying contributing to some of the places I'm contributing, but I feel like I could be a more steady voice somewhere. So certainly I put that out there as something that I am seeking. My coaching practice, this is the first time in, I would say, a decade that I've actually been looking for more clients, because something about being home, recovering, continuing to coach clients through all of my recovery period, it put me very much in tune with my coaching skills and those relationships with my clients, for me, deepened. I got off the phone on from some of those sessions and just felt like, it helped me, it helped them. Obviously, most importantly, it helped them. But, for me to get off the phone and think, oh my gosh, thank God I'm still doing this and able to do this, because, I was limited in other things I could do after having surgery. And so coaching, I was reminded of what a constant and what a satisfying constant it is. And I feel like I could be helping more people to the point of, what could we be doing right now? I always think of my writing as activism, and certainly coaching is not activism, but it is active in terms of, am I helping two people cope with whatever it is? I certainly have people in my life who are in marriages. We just talked about the politics, marriages or relationships with parents, or where the politics divide has become so deep that that's become part of the stress of their lives that they're trying to navigate. So I'm uniquely positioned to help people like that because I'm going through it myself. And I keep trying new things. I took a voiceover class and even some private voiceover coaching. I created a YouTube channel, but I like the possibilities that are out there. If anyone wants to reach me, email's probably best, nancy.colasurdo@gmail.com, nancy.colasurdo@gmail.com. But I am also quite active on Instagram, nancola_writer. Twitter, I'm probably more of a lurker than anything, but I do post my columns and such on there, and that is simply Nancola, Nancola. That's pretty much the dealio.
Well, Nancy, thanks for that information. I don't know if I'm following you on Instagram or not, but I will do it right now if I'm not.
Oh, you're gonna find one of your poems on there. I've been reading your poems, your book, and I put it up last week, I believe. I think I tagged you, so check it out.
Okay, I will. So, Nancy, thank you ever so much for being on Twice 5 Miles Radio.
Thank you so much.
And there you go, my friends. Thus concludes my conversation with Nancy Colasurdo. I enjoyed the political part of what we were talking about. And I've always given a lot of thought to politics. And I've always considered myself a liberal, maybe not so much a progressive, but I'm certainly liberal in the way I approach the world. And I remember how that formed. And it's interesting to think about how we form our political opinions. Where do they come from? When I grew up in Western North Carolina, I remember my grandfather, we called him Pappy. He was a big Republican. Pappy was a conservative. He worked at the Farmers Federation, which is down in the River Arts District of Asheville. And nobody remembers the Farmers Federation. It's now the large building that sits beside the bridge when you come down from West Asheville and you cross over the French Broad River and you go around a little rondelay roundabout. And right there on the corner is this huge building. It now has restaurants in it and hotels and artist studios. But way back when, and when I say when, in the 1950s, my grandfather, Pappy, worked there. He sold farm implements. He was a farmer. He was a small-time farmer. He had gardens. He was definitely in the farming scene. And back during that time, tobacco warehouses lined the river and folks brought their products in and sold them and bought their farm machinery from my grandfather. And he was a big Republican. And I remember one night he took me to a Republican meeting. I wasn't a Republican. I wasn't a Democrat. I was just a kid riding with my grandfather to something he did. For some reason, he didn't want me to go into the meeting, or maybe he took me into the meeting and I was bored with it. I'm not sure why. I had other things to do. Who knows? What would I have to do? What I did do was stand outside the door and listen to my grandfather talk. And I don't remember what he was saying. All I remember is that he was the leader of this group of Republicans. And I have a cousin, Tim Harrison, who lives in Richmond, Virginia. And Tim's a staunch Republican. He's a staunch conservative, evangelical Christian, certainly will be voting Republican, voting for Trump. And when I spoke with Tim years ago, he was telling me he was so glad that I was following in the tradition of my Republican grandfather, Pappy, and how Pappy had influenced him. And I said, well, Tim, I hate to break the news, but I'm a little more liberal than that. And I lean in the other direction. My mother leaned in the direction of the democratic thinking, the liberal thinking. So we had lots and lots of influences when I was growing up. And so I've never really known exactly how to talk about all that in this kind of environment we're in now, where we all take sides. People get so antagonistic out of the gate around these political things that we're discussing. And I remember also my father, I never knew if he was a registered Democrat or if he was a registered Republican. When I would ask him who he voted for, he said, that's private information. I will not tell anybody who I vote for. All you need to know is I vote. To this day, I have no idea which direction he leaned, and it went to his grave as a secret. And I don't even know if he was registered as a Democrat or a Republican. I do know my mother was a registered Democrat. So when we look back on our stories, moving away from the unruly climate we're in right now, the divisions where we're fighting each other, we have all these strong opinions. If you move back in your story, you might find you rose up in the same way I rose up, interacting between the two situations. I don't remember my grandfather, Pappy, ever being that adamant about his position, although I imagine in a conversation with adults, he may well have been. I don't know for sure. And so when you think about where you stand, what your political opinions, what political opinions you hold and how you hold them and how strongly you feel about them, I encourage you to take a breath and hold those opinions deep in your heart. At the same time, can you sit down with someone like I did with my friends and talk about something like the deep state without getting all riled up, without drawing the swords, getting ready to go to the psychological battlefield or the personal battlefield with some great flag raised? It's important to plant your flag. It's important to raise it. It's important to bring up all of these issues. Absolutely, no problem there. But I think it's really more important to pause for a moment and say, okay, can I listen to this? And I remember the first time I became politically engaged, I was a student at Brevard College, Brevard Junior College at Brevard, North Carolina. It's a 4-year college now. And I knew I wanted to know more. And I also knew I had very little background in the civic discourse of the day. This was 1968. So this was at the height of the Vietnam War, and I was 18, and I knew that I could easily be drafted. So I thought, I want to know more. So I went to the library and I went to the magazine area and I looked at all of the magazines on the shelf and thought, well, what in the world do I do here? Where do I start? And of course, my eye fell on Newsweek and Time. And you still have those weekly magazines out there. I don't know if Time is still around. I think it might be. Newsweek may no longer be on the shelf. And I thought, well, if I just start reading, maybe I will eventually catch up. I will eventually know something. I wanted to know something so I could talk to somebody in a way that felt good about. So I remember getting the magazines off the shelf and I opened up the magazines. And I don't remember if I opened Time or Newsweek up first. It didn't matter. When I opened the magazines, I didn't read the text. I just looked at the pictures. I read the captions under the pictures and I thought, what are all these people doing? And there was a big world there for me in the Time magazine and the Newsweek. And eventually I realized I didn't have to know everything. I realized I didn't have to read all of the magazines on that shelf. I just understood that if I flip through things, if I pay attention, if I allow myself to study a little bit as I go along, I will eventually catch up. As I said, Brevard College was a 2-year junior college. So after I finished 2 years, I didn't graduate out of Brevard. I just graduated into my 20s as a curious roamabout fellow. But in my 30s, I went back to college at UNCA, and I entered UNCA in 1982 when the Berlin Wall was falling, or near that time. And I majored in political science. I majored in international relations. So by that time, I was curious enough and had studied enough and had thought about it enough to want to know more. So now here we are, all this time later, I'm still curious. I still want to know more. And I still want to hear what you have to say. I'm willing to be open and remain present in conversations like the one Nancy and I just had, and the one that you and I are having, and all the others I've had on this radio show for the last 8 years, asking questions and listening to what somebody else has to say. So on that note, I would like to say thank you for listening to what we had to say today. And thank you for listening also to Twice 5 Miles Radio. fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Nave, always airing first on WPVMLP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Devine Dial, for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville. Robin Collier, thank you for managing KCEI-FM, Cultural Energy Radio in Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com. If you'd like to hear more of Walter's music, he's a terrific musician. I love the work he does, and I'm really happy that his sounds appear on this radio show every week. You can always reach out to me, Nave, at jamesnave.com. Nave spelled N-A-V-E. I'd like to remind you that we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to write more and engage yourself on the page or your stories on the page, imaginativestorm.com is a good place to go. So once again, thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you come back sometime soon. And until then, I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.